Hello and a very warm welcome to Meirc's webinar entitled A Roadmap for Transforming Procurement into a Strategic Partner. The procurement department is a vital member of any organization. With total spend reaching 70% of annual revenues, there is increasing pressure on procurement to abandon traditional administrative or rubber stamping practices in favor of a central strategic role. My name is Ahmed Ghanoum. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar where I'll be talking about the role of a modern strategic procurement department. I will also be sharing Meirc's 5-step roadmap towards getting there. We will be visiting the 4 pillars of structure, work streams, systems, and culture, and we will of course explore how each can help transform your procurement function into a value-creating partner within the organization. So the idea is, how do we move on from being regarded as a purely cost-centered function to a value-adding partner of renown in the organization? So we expect to spend 30 minutes going through the material. Please feel free to leave your questions or comments in the chat window. I see some of you are already using that window. And we will try to capture all your input, and I will do my best to answer all of your questions towards the end of the session. Before we get started, allow me to introduce myself in a little bit more detail. I am a management consultant with Meirc Training and Consulting based out of Dubai. I am facilitating and championing a number of procurement trainings for the company. And my procurement experience includes a couple of stints. The first with NA+, which is a importer of fresh and frozen meat, commodities, and fresh fruits in Turkey, East Europe, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. So I was in charge of the supply chain department for the importation of goods for 14 different countries. I was then the head of procurement for MTN, which is South Africa's largest telecom provider. It is actually a South African telecom provider. I am an alumni of the active program in strategy and organization at Stanford University. I also have an executive MBA from IE Business School in Madrid, Instituto de Empresa. Now, today's webinar is, if you will, a distilled version of 2 of Meirc's procurement training programs. The first, which is the strategic sourcing program that is scheduled to be held on the 15th of June, and a second session scheduled for later on this year in November. This webinar is also going to be covering some key ideas from a second program, which is developing the purchasing policies, procedures, and service level agreements, or SLAs, for your organization. So basically, if you will, this webinar will provide you a flavor of the main content provided in both programs. Now, let's take a quick look at the agenda. The webinar will cover 3 sections, the first of which is the procurement challenges and trends that we actually live and see unfolding in today's business world. The second part is about the role of procurement as a strategic partner, and what does it mean to be a strategic partner in your organization. And finally, we will be looking at the strategic sourcing methodology, which is really the roadmap towards getting us to where we want to be, which is becoming a strategic partner in the organization. Before we do so, before we get to the material, I would like to get each and every one of you involved in a small poll. So I'm going to be posing a question for you. So what is the biggest challenge faced by the procurement department at your organization? And I would like you, please, if you could just hover your mouse cursor over one of the answers. So A is the lack of procurement awareness by the end user. B, no or ineffective ERP systems to support your operations. C, authority matrix slows down approvals, so some companies have up to 14 or 6 approvals from PR to delivery. Or D, politics and the absence of leadership support in the company is actually affecting your or curtailing your operations. So I'll just give you a few seconds to place in your votes. Okay. So let's look at the results of the survey then. Most of you say that the authority matrix slows down your approvals, which is a very interesting thing to say. Of course, there is no wrong and no right answer. All four mentioned reasons here are prominent among large and medium-sized corporations. The second option that we saw was a lack of procurement awareness by the end user, also at 9%. So let me just discuss these briefly, and then I'll take, I think, Naresh, you have an option that was not available in the survey, so if you want, you can also type that into the chat window, and we will comment on that. So first of all, the lack of procurement awareness by the end user. So 9% of you voted in favor of that response, and basically, in the absence of awareness, what happens is you end up with poor planning. Every purchase suddenly becomes an emergency purchase, and the blame game takes effect. The other one, the majority of answers were for the authority matrix close down approvals. Again, whenever you are required to go through 12, 14, 16 people to approve a purchase, whether you're buying an airplane or a car or an elephant, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is you're telling your employees that you do not have the capabilities to take the decision without further approvals. It slows down the operation, it harms morale, and it robs the employees of empowerment. Now, a lot of the time, some companies also blame the ERP system for slowing down their procurement operations. The idea behind the ERP system is not just to have one, obviously. It is to have one that serves the interests of your companies and that can deliver in line with your processes and policies. So to sum up, the ERP system should serve your company and your department, and it's not the other way around. It's not your company and department who should be serving the ERP system. And of course, politics and the absence of leadership support, obviously without the required support, and when I say leadership, I'm not just talking about the head of procurement, I am talking about the head of the organization. Without that person's support, procurement will always be a second-tier department in the company. Now, let's get back to our material. So, to set the premise for this webinar, there are three strategic objectives, if you want, for a procurement department of an organization operating in today's business world. The first is to ensure supply security. The second is to help generate savings for the company. And the third one is to make sure that the internal customers or the end users are satisfied. Now, allow me to comment on each of these, starting with ensuring supply security. At the highest level, an organization creates value by transforming input to output that is worth more than the original input or worth more than the effort that is going into the operation. Now, if the input, basically the supply, is cut, that could suffocate the company. And I give you an example of a bakery. The minute a bakery runs out of its supply of flour, operations will cease, and the longer operations cease, the higher the risk of going out of business altogether. Generating savings, again, we say that in a modern organization, up to 70% of annual revenues account for spend. So anytime you are earning as a business 100 riyals or 100 dirhams or $100, you are actually spending 70 against that in procurement. Now, we also know that on average, an industry's return on investment stands at 14.9%. So the average of all industry profits is 14.9%, meaning a 10% inefficiencies on your purchasing practices can actually cut your profits in half. So purchasing, in that sense, is tantamounts to 50% of the importance of everything you do in your organization. If you fail in purchasing, you might as well shut down your business, put your money in a bank account, and you are bound to earn more interest doing that. Finally, satisfying your internal customers. Procurement, like most support functions in an organization, is the type of place where when something goes wrong, you are to blame for it. When something is going right, it goes without mention and hardly with a thank you. Now, the scary part is that a lot of the time, the end user can actually make it go wrong just to make the purchasing department look bad. And this is, I'm talking from not just my experience, but from the experience of the thousands of participants that attend our programs. Which means that at the end of the day, if you don't have a satisfied internal customer, you will never be able to operate at full efficiency. Now, this is what we want to achieve as a department. Now, how about we take a look at the traditional purchasing model before we jump to the more strategic model that we are seeking to achieve. Now, traditionally, procurement departments were highly administrative. So basically, all you were doing was processing paperwork, and sometimes you would think in the paperwork as we see the sunken lady in the picture. There was a focus on narrow and simple tasks. Employees were controlled and supervised very tightly, as opposed to being empowered to take decisions on their own. Employees or staff were told how they should do something. They were often told what they should be doing. They were seldom told why they should be doing. So in effect, the focus was on activities rather than on the actual results. So rather than focus on the outcomes, we were focused narrowly on the outputs. Number 6, managers also had firm control over the staff. In fact, the ratio of managers to staff in a traditional procurement model was sometimes somewhere around 1 to 7. So each manager will have 7 employees reporting to them. When you operate a strategic model, that number goes to 20, 25, or sometimes even 30. So imagine that, 30 people reporting to the same manager. How is that possible? That is possible through empowering your employees, through training them, and through providing them access to important information upon which they can make decisions, usually through an ERP system. So this model used to work for the longest time. Why does it not work anymore, or why do we expect it to not operate at a level of efficiency that is suitable for today's industry? Well, there are a number of trends that are living, some of them at a very advanced stage, in fact, that require us to change the way we approach procurement. I'll be talking about a couple of these. The first being a shift from an industrial economy towards a knowledge economy. So we see this in most labor-intensive industries. We also see this in the industrial economy. We see in labor-intensive industries, and we see in agriculture. Everything else is moving towards a knowledge-based economy where, under the new rules, it's not anymore the low cost that will guarantee your survival. Rather, it is the knowledge and the know-how that will determine your success. So that is the first trend. The second major trend is the move from local economies to a global economy. In the past, you wanted to have a coffee. There was a family-owned business down the road. Today, chances are you want to have a coffee, you go to one of the more international or global brands. Now, if you, as a business, make a move from a family business to a global brand, you simply cannot maintain your modus operandi, specifically not when it comes to procurement. The way you issue a PR is different. The way you approve it will be different. The way you issue a PO is different. The way you approve that is different. The way you qualify, you pre-qualify your suppliers. The way your attitude towards health, safety, and environmental issues will have to change. The bottom line is the whole procurement infrastructure requires a facelift under the new trends. Obviously, there are many other trends that I will not get into, such as the move towards electronic-based interfaces, moving away from the manual interfaces. So the question becomes, how do we transform my procurement department into something that is more suitable for today's environment, into something that is more strategic? How can we act as a true partner in the organization? How can we do so strategically? Now, let me read you an extract of the Apex definition of strategic sourcing. So we say strategic sourcing is a comprehensive approach for locating and sourcing key material suppliers, which often includes the business process of analyzing total spend for material spend categories. There is a focus on development of long-term relationships with trading partners, and then they go on to say strategic sourcing includes the automation of RFQ, RFP, electronic auctioning, and contract management process. For me, the three key words in that entire definition are analysis, partnership, and automation. These three concepts need to be adopted as a cornerstone for any procurement modus operandi operating in today's modern world. And each, in turn, brings its many benefits and advantages. Let's take a look at analysis. Okay, so in the absence of proper analysis, there is very little you can manage, starting with your savings. So if I want to increase my savings, I need to be able to understand my spend categories. I need to understand how much of my budget each is consuming, and I need to be able to manage the performance of each category with regards to savings. Better analysis will give me a better make or buy decision-making ability, and it will make strategic decisions more sound, especially when it comes to my dealings with the supplier. Now, with regards to partnerships, there are so many benefits you can get from partnering with a supplier. And when I mean partnership, I mean treating the supplier as one of your own. Okay, you want to treat the supplier as if they were a department within your company. Doing so will, for one, lower the administration costs associated with dealing with the supplier. It will lead to improved cost structure for the product because your supplier suddenly has a clear awareness on your actual product and can design products to spec. It can lead to better planning and deliveries because now the supplier has full visibility over your requirements for the year or for the next year as well in some cases, or sometimes for the next 3 to 5 years, depending on the sophistication of your industries. Partnering also provides a great opportunity for product innovation because the investments in research and development are now shared between the supplier and the partner, and not just sharing the costs, but the fact that you can guarantee a future acquisition of a product that is still under research will on its own add a lot of value to the supplier. Finally, automation, having everything operate through a streamlined, seamless system, will give you faster and cheaper processing. It will enable you to generate better management reports, and it will improve your decision making. Now, I like to compare the journey towards strategic procurement to that of a journey to climbing a mountain, okay, or a mountain climbing exhibition. At the foot of the mountain, you have the base camp, and what you want to really achieve is you want to reach the summit up here, which is the strategic element of purchasing. So what typically you would do is you want to assess where you stand, and you want to, based on where you are today, draw a map to get you to the top of that mountain. Let me explain a little bit of what each of the terms that you see in front of you means, starting from the bottom. Whenever we operate an ad hoc procurement department, this is basically the closest it gets to anarchy at the workplace. While there is, or there may be, basic knowledge of purchasing practices at the company, you are going to find that there is usually an absence of clear policies and procedures towards operating. At a high level, at the elementary level, you'll actually see policies and processes exist, but they are often only applied for the complex or really high value, high strategic items. You will see an absence of policy enforcement for all other items. Now, once we get to the clerical, it starts getting to a level of considerable sophistication. Here you have some real leadership involvement to support your department and to offer you direction. Will also, typically in that state, you will have policies and procedures that are actually backed by an ERP system. So all of your processes are now automated, and you have functional improvement initiatives in place. The higher level, which is 80% of the road, would be the integrated procurement department. And this is a state where end users act as partners in purchasing. So now my end user is no longer my enemy. They are actually my friend. We take decisions together. They sit on my committees. I sit on their committees. And we are working as part of a team. And this, of course, requires a major cultural shift in the organization. SLAs are in place governing relationships between the procurement department and every other department in the company. So an SLA will typically tell you things like how long it should take for a PR to be approved, how long should it take for a PR to be transformed into a PO, how long from the date I submit a purchase request till the date it is delivered, etc., so on and so forth. You will also typically have KPIs that are used for your decision making at this stage. Finally, at the strategic summit, what you have is basically a strategic sourcing in place, which is something I'll be talking about towards the end of this webinar. You will have multiple purchasing strategies and empowered staff. And of course, you now have partnerships, not just internally within the company, but you have partnerships with your external suppliers. So then, how do we climb this mountain? We like to take, the simplest and most pragmatic of approaches. Basically, starting by asking ourselves, where do we stand? Where does my department today stand? Question 2 is, where is it that I want to be? And then, based on where I am and where I want to be, how am I going to get there? Once you answer those 3 critical questions, the rest is pure implementation. Now, to help us understand where we are today, we break down our department, if you want, into 4 main pillars, 4 foundations to every department. The first one, which is structure. The second one, the systems. The third, work streams. And the fourth, the culture. So when it comes to each of these pillars, you want to ask yourself some questions. When it comes to the structure, things like, first of all, do I have a horizontal organization, or do I have, is it flat, or is it not really so flat? Is it all integrated? Does the head of purchasing report directly to the CEO, or does the head of purchasing report to admin or to finance? Because you want them really reporting to the CEO, and you also want the head of purchasing to be sitting on the board of the company, involved in those critical decisions. You want to look for the presence of SLAs, and you want to make sure that all employees, not just procurement employees, are aware of purchasing's strategic role in the organization. Systems, again, you just want to make sure that you have an ERP system in place, and that ERP should provide access to a centralized database where any employee sitting anywhere in the company can make informed decisions based on tapping into that system. The third thing is the culture. The work streams. So our policies and procedures in place for planning, for vendor management, purchasing, strategies, and admin. And finally, with regards to my culture, I want to ensure that I have a culture that inspires transparency, ethical conduct, and I want to make sure as well that senior management from across the organization is supporting me in my day-to-day operations. So this is a look at the questions that you will need to ask to let me know where I currently stand. Now, from there, you want to look at where do you want to be as a department. Now, the obvious answer is I want to operate at a strategic level, which is at the highest level. But having said that, you may have some intermediary milestones along the way. So you might want to jump first to the elementary stage, and then to the clerical stage, and to the integrated stage. You want to take those baby steps to ensure that as you go along, people are actually following you in a proper manner, and you don't lose focus on your end goal. Now, how do we get there? Three things we need to look at. The first, which is identifying any gaps in my systems. The way I identify the gaps is by looking at the difference between where I stand and where I want to be, and by looking also at what I currently have in place in terms of systems, in terms of ERP, in terms of structure, and also what is it that I need to have in place to make the transition. Once I have that, I need to implement my improvement initiatives. So understanding what I have will translate into several things that need to be done, and each of these initiatives should have an owner. Each will have a budget. Each will have a time frame, performance measures, a start date, and an end date. And then once you roll out these initiatives, you want to make sure that you manage your performance and take corrective action as you go along the way. And also you want to be able to ensure that you are making progress and you are on the right track. So I'll just give you some ideas on some of the initiatives that we can implement. So back to the four foundation pillars of structure, systems, work streams, and culture. With structure, you can implement initiatives such as separating your purchasing from your finance functions. You can develop and employ service level agreements, centralize your database, configure performance reports when it comes to the systems. Work streams, you need to somehow minimize your approvals by increasing the capabilities and empowering your employees further. Design multiple procurement processes, and also decentralize all non-strategic activities such as petty cash purchases. And finally, you want to make sure you have a mission for the purchasing department or the procurement department that is aligned with the mission of the rest of the organization. And finally, you want to develop or you want to align your organizational objectives with the objectives and the targets of the. Now, I would like to jump to the strategic sourcing methodology that I hinted about. And this is really a 7-step methodology composed of 3 phases: a planning phase, an execution phase, and a continuous improvement phase. So once you set on your journey to the top of the mountain, you need to. Now, some of the activities that you will undertake are as follows. Number 1, under analyzing spend categories, you want to really have product categories. You want to understand the different product groups, and you want to make sure that you have enough market intelligence around each of these products to enable you to take the appropriate decisions and and make the right decisions about each category. Next, you want to develop your acquisition strategies. And typically, when you want to develop a strategy for approaching a product spend, you want to look at the risks associated with acquiring that product, and you also want to look at the impact, the financial impact of acquiring that product on your organization. You then want to identify your suppliers, obviously pre-qualify them through market visits, questionnaires, and so on. And then you want to develop your actual processes such as the RFP execution strategies, negotiations approaches, develop your templates, develop your forms. And that brings you to the end of your first phase, the planning phase. And then under the execution, what you're doing is basically you are implementing whatever you developed in the first phase. And then you are trying to integrate your suppliers by providing them access to common systems, creating ad hoc teams, ad hoc committees that can work on design, planning, and delivery, sharing intelligence, sharing your forecasts to improve planning and deliveries as well, and of course by sharing your future plans in order to plan future products through the research and development labs at the client side, at the supplier side. Finally, you want to manage your performance as you go along and introduce continuous improvement initiatives to cover any gaps along the road. Now, the last thing I would like to talk about before we take your questions is step 2, developing strategies. And if we take that step and we blow it out, we talk about what we call the purchasing portfolio management matrix. Now, we said purchasing should be part of corporate strategy. As such, it's important that purchasers know how to evaluate the risk and maximize profits by having the right approach to procurement. So we look at this purchasing portfolio management matrix that hinges on 2 axes. On the y-axis, we have the financial impact going from low impact to high impact. And on the x-axis, we assess the supplier risk, again going from low risk to high risk. And the idea is for each spend category, I need to analyze what is the impact of having that item in stock on my bottom line. And I also need to assess how difficult is it to actually procure that item. What is the risk associated with the suppliers when it comes to that item? So we get 4 quadrants. Let's look at these one by one. Any item that is a low supply risk item that is expected to have a minimum impact on our balance sheet is what we call a routine item. Things such as your stationery products. Anytime you want to procure stationery or other routine items, you want to process this as efficiently as possible. Meaning, go for the easiest procurement process. It might be petty cash. You can call it cover agreement, blanket agreement. What you want to avoid is wasting too much time over here, because this is not what is going to make or break your company. And this is not certainly why they pay procurement people to do. Rather, we should be investing as procurement people our time in more strategic things. The second quadrant is the bottleneck items. So things that are, again, not very impacting on our financial statements, but somewhat difficult to procure. So things like maybe a special bolt or a special nut that is produced by a single supplier. Now that item might not cost a lot of money, but you know what? If that supplier goes out of stock, that item might actually bottleneck my entire manufacturing line. So what we want to do here is we want to ensure that we have enough stocks, what we call volume assurance. So you know what? Let me buy a lot of that item. It's cheap. It won't cost me much. It's low maintenance. Let me just throw it in the warehouse anytime I need it. I know I can access it. The third spend approach is the leverage items. So things that are very high on the financial impact continuum, and though with a very low supplier risk. Things like if I operate a bakery, flour would be something that is very easy to procure because there is no shortage of flour suppliers. But you know what? The day I go out of stocks, my entire bakery will cease operating. So what do I do here? I need to exploit my purchasing power. I need to show my muscles, flex my muscles to the supplier, try to get those discounts, try to generate those savings in this category, because this is what is actually impacting my bottom line, high financial impact. The last quadrant relates to the strategic items. So things that are both high on supply risk and high on financial impact. So the procurement of an airplane engine, if you were an airline or an airplane producer, there are only a handful of companies that can manufacture an airplane engine. So there's a high risk that one of them or a couple of them might not actually want to work with me. And at the same time, if I don't acquire those engines, the impact on my balance sheet is going to be extremely severe. what I want to do here, or the route I want to take here, is I want to go towards partnerships. I want to be as close as I can to my supplier and to ensure that I will have them near me the day that I want them, and I will be there for them as well when they need me. So that is really the end of the material. I hope you enjoyed going through the slides, and I hope you found it worth your time. So I'm happy to take any questions that you have. In the meantime, allow me to post the links to the programs I alluded to earlier. So the strategic sourcing program can be accessed through this link, while the second program on developing purchasing policies, procedures, and SLAs can be accessed through this second link. So we have a first question from Naresh. Thank you, Naresh, for that question. How do we measure culture as a component that has impact on strategic procurement or business volume, or is it just a guess? Now, culture really is, that's a very good question. Culture is really one of those things where you cannot grab a thermometer or a scale or what have you to actually measure it. What you can do, however, is you can use questionnaires that you will send out to your employees, asking them specific questions about the culture with regards to the values, with regards to empowerment, with regards to the way employees are treated, and with regards to the flexibility that you have to operate as a company. And typically, to make sense out of the information, you will need to conduct that survey or questionnaire repeatedly so that you can figure out if I am improving or going backwards. So let's say the first time I conduct the survey, I score a 56% overall satisfaction with the culture. The second time, I need to pose the same questions to see if I can take that 56% closer to the 70, or am I actually staying put, or maybe going. A, what are the best KPIs strategic sourcing? Well, typically, thank you, Muhammad, for that question. Typically, the things you want to measure are, first of all, related to your savings. So, am I generating sufficient savings for my company? The second thing is how efficient are my processes? So the speed or the velocity of my operations, and this is something you need to measure at every single stage of the operation. So PR to PO, PO to PO approval, PO approval to delivery, delivery to returns. So that's another area of measurement. Savings, speed. The third thing you want to measure is quality, and quality has really a number of levels here. The first is the satisfaction of my end users. So are they satisfied with the quality of my services? And the second thing would be measuring the quality of the goods that I am receiving. So anytime I have an order, is it being received in full? Is it being received on time? And is it being received in a manner that is good for consumption? So Naresh, an additional comment. So is it an engagement culture of an organization? The other thing that I would like to highlight here is that the culture that you have in the procurement department should also be reflective of the culture that you have in the organization. So the last thing you want is to have two conflicting cultures. This is why we always go to the corporate vision and mission, and from that we can actually cascade down to our departmental vision and mission, and therefore the values and the cultures. Any other questions? So we have another question from Gade. So what are the controls to take care of in supply chain? So again, what you want to be controlling in supply chain is a number of things. First of all, you want to control your processes. So are my processes being conducted on time? You want to control the stocks in your warehouses. So, and typically the way you conduct controls over your stocks is by classifying your stocks in terms of importance. So one way to do it would be to say, okay, I have what we call A items, I have B items, and I have C items. A items are the most important items in my warehouse, and therefore they should be controlled the tightest. B items are still important, but not as important, so I will relax the control somewhat for the B items. The C items are the least important, and this is something that I will control the least. So maybe annual inventory counts as opposed to potentially daily counts for the A items. I'll give you an example of if you operate a deli or a small supermarket with thousands of items, at the end of every shift, how do you control your stocks? Are you going to count every single item in the supermarket? Probably not. What you want to do is you want to count the number of televisions, the number of refrigerators, the high value items very closely, and then the chewing gums and the batteries and the chocolate bars would be something that you will control a lot less loosely for it to make sense from a value or cost benefit perspective. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Meirc.com